One of our values at Cornerstone is that we ask the question, what does love require in any situation we find ourselves in? This question perfectly postures our mind and our heart to follow Jesus well. Now, the answer to this question isn't always clear, but it sets us in the right direction. But what happens when the answer to this question requires you to do something you're not good at or you don't want to do? In trying to follow Jesus, this happens to me all the time. In some situation, love requires me to be in touch with my feelings, but I'm more of a thinker. In some situations, love requires me to create a plan and organize details, but I'm more of a big picture guy and more spontaneous. Well, we're continuing our series going through the Gospel of Luke today, and we find ourselves at the end of chapter 10, and as we'll see, I think Martha in this story can relate to this problem of being asked by Jesus to do something that doesn't come naturally to her. Luke 10, starting in verse 38. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. And she came to him and she asked, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her to help me." "Martha, Martha," the Lord answered, "you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her." Have you ever taken a personality test or like a spiritual gifts assessment? They're fun things to do, and they can be really helpful. And if you honestly take the assessment and fill it out like truthfully, they can give you some insight into your personality, your strengths, and your giftings as a person. They can highlight both what you're good at, but also things you're not so good at. Some are more accurate and useful than others, but they're a fun process to go through, and they're fun to discuss with other people. One of the things that the story of Mary and Martha highlights is the God-given differences in personalities that we all have. Now, it seems to me, I don't know this for sure, I'm making some assumptions, but based off the text, it seems to me that Martha is a doer. She gets stuff done. She takes responsibility. She is considerate of others. Martha feels pressure to live up to cultural and gender-based expectations of what she is supposed to do. She seems to be a rule follower. It also seems to me that Mary is more relational. She can connect with people on an emotional level. She can sense what the other people need and can be that for them. She's less concerned with what other people think about her or what the rules are. Mary is likely more creative and more empathetic. And I'd imagine that for Mary's whole life, Martha was the person who achieved more, got more accolades and affirmation. Martha always got more credit for doing things the right way. Martha better fit the expectations put on what a woman was supposed to be in ancient Middle Eastern culture. Martha made sure things got done, that the food was cooked, that the house was clean. And Martha knew her place as a woman and didn't break those cultural boundaries. I wonder if Mary often felt less than because she was different than Martha and couldn't keep up with Martha's responsibility and productivity. And then Jesus arrives, and Mary is drawn to his powerful but loving energy. She can sense that this man is different, that this man represents something different, something better. All she wants to do is sit at his feet and learn from him, to soak in his peace, his grace, his wisdom, and his joy. And then Martha comes storming in and interrupts this special moment. Martha rebukes Mary and tells her she needs to get to work. And I'm sure Mary has heard Martha say this repeatedly throughout her whole life. But Jesus steps in and he rebukes Martha and praises Mary. He says that what Mary is doing is better. It's what love required in that particular moment. And this must feel incredible to Mary. Finally, she is the one doing things better than Martha. And Martha must be taken back a bit. I mean, the tables have turned. It must be a little disorienting for her. She's not used to being the one doing the wrong thing. For much of Martha's life, her personality fit what culture required of her. But in this situation, what love required of her did not come naturally. She may not have had the emotional intelligence that Mary had to sense Jesus' presence and sit there. Martha may have been more bound by those cultural rules on gender that would make Martha not even consider sitting at a rabbi's feet and learning from him. I mean, that's something that only a man could do in this culture. The reality is, though, love required Martha to sit in the presence of the Lord, and she didn't know how to do that. But it came so naturally to Mary. Okay, to be fair to Martha, she was most likely doing what she thought love required of her in that moment. And this reminds me of how much we need the Holy Spirit to help us discern what love requires in any given situation. And it can be tricky to discern this. But I do believe that with the help of the Holy Spirit, we can get better and better at this skill as we grow closer to Jesus. Also, the point of the story isn't that Mary's personality is better than Martha's. It just means that in this one situation, Mary's strengths were better aligned with what love required in that moment. And I'm sure that in many other moments, what love requires came more naturally to Martha than it did to Mary. If I'm really honest with myself, I tend to do what love requires when it's something I'm naturally good at or when it's something I enjoy doing. If it's something I don't enjoy or I'm not good at, I tend to make excuses for why it's not something I should do. Someone else is better than that, so they can do that. Are we supposed to only do what love requires when it matches our personality and comes easy to us? Well, of course not. We all encounter millions of situations throughout the course of our whole lives where we have to figure out, okay, how do we do what love requires? And some of those situations will lead us into things that align really well with our strengths, and many of them won't. And we still have a responsibility to do what life requires either way, even if it means we're doing something we're not naturally good at. You know, Moses felt this way. When God called him to lead the Hebrew people out of slavery, Moses wasn't a natural leader. It wasn't what he was gifted at. But God promised to do the heavy lifting. Moses needed to trust and obey and do what love required of him. I'll never forget the summer of 2010. I was the missions pastor here at Cornerstone, and in March of 2010, one of the most devastating earthquakes in modern history demolished much of Haiti, devastating one of the poorest places in the world, killing tens of thousands of people. Our missions department had relationships already in place in Haiti before the earthquake, so we were uniquely positioned to help respond to the crisis. I and a few other people flew out there soon after the earthquake as part of a scouting trip to explore how we could help serve and love people as they tried to survive and rebuild. Long story short, the door was open for us to help in all sorts of ways, and one of them being they needed lots of people to come and help. So that summer, I led the training and sending of 12 separate missions teams and over 250 total Cornerstoners going over to Haiti to serve. Now, to plan and coordinate the details of that many missions trips within a 10-week period was so far away from what I was good at. I'm not a details person, but I had to oversee booking flights and accommodations and setting up a fundraising initiative and help each one of the 250 people manage that initiative and coordinate the service projects each day on the ground for each team and Bible study materials for them and food arrangements and put on trainings and all the things, right? So many details, so much planning, so much coordination. I dropped balls, I made mistakes. Other people had to adjust to cover for what I wasn't good at. It was a long summer, and for much of it, I was overwhelmed and a little bit miserable. I did not like all the tasks I had to get done. and working in a way where I'm not using my gifts. I'm working out of my weaknesses. But here's what I learned. God is more interested in our obedience than he is our excellence. He'd rather have a person willing to do what love requires, even if it means they make mistakes and stumble along the way, than a person who will only obey when it fits what they like doing. It reminds me of what the Apostle Paul says in 2 Corinthians when he says, but he said to me, talking about Jesus said, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. And then Paul says, therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. I learned that it's easier to give God glory and be humble when we're working in an area of weakness. I know I didn't do a great job in coordinating all these teams to Haiti. I dropped balls and I inconvenienced a lot of people, but God still did incredible things that summer, miraculous things. And in no way am I tempted to think they were done because of my great strengths. I also learned that we can improve in our areas of weakness. We may never be as good at those things as someone who is naturally gifted at them, but we can improve. We can become more well-rounded people in terms of what we're capable of and what our personality is. Later in the gospel account, we see how much Martha has grown in an area of weakness. Remember the story, like later in the gospel story when Lazarus was dying and it took forever for Jesus to come down to Bethany. And Mary's upset, but as you read through Martha was upset, but as you read through Martha's interactions with Jesus, you see how much she prioritizes her relationship with him and professes her faith in him. It's very powerful, and it's such a far cry from her first time meeting Jesus. And it shows us how much the Holy Spirit can work in all of us to help us grow in our areas of weaknesses. When I take a personality test, it shows that I'm an introvert. But there are many times, like when I'm in the courtyard or the lobby before church starts, where I feel like love requires me to be an extrovert. And it may suck more energy out of me, but I can absolutely muster the strength to be extroverted for a little bit. For years, I used to come home from work, say hi to the wife and kids, ask how their day was, eat dinner, and then I would go off and either read a book or watch a game on TV. I was tired, and that's what I wanted to do. However, in order to be a good husband and father, which I learned over the years, love required me to not just ask how their day was, but to emotionally connect with them, which is something I'm not naturally good at. So I'd avoid doing what love required of me. And it's been a long journey for me to learn how to say yes what God calls me to be with my family, to find out what I'm feeling and to share it with them, to seek out what's going on under the surface with each of them. What about you? How do you usually respond when what love requires of you does not align with what you're good at or what you want? Okay, a couple other things I'd like to touch on in regards to this text and this story of the interaction between Jesus and Mary and Martha. And I highlighted it briefly, but I think it's worth thinking about a little bit more. And that's the reality that Jesus shattered cultural gender roles during his 3 years of ministry. I don't think at this particular dinner, when Jesus was staying at Mary and Martha's, in this moment, there were any Pharisees there who are Jewish religious leaders. But if there were, they would have been horrified of this. It's unthinkable that a woman would be sitting in the posture of a disciple of a rabbi. That role was exclusively for men. This is one of so many moments where Jesus expands what's possible for women, continuing to highlight their value and equality in a society that dogmatically devalued and oppressed them. Another thing that I noticed as I was studying and digging into this story, and it brought me into the whole book of Luke. This is one of so many stories in the book of Luke that involves hospitality in a home. This is a consistent theme in Luke's gospel and throughout the book of Acts, which was also written by Luke. Central to Luke's description of how Christians follow Jesus is the home. It's one of the main characters of the story. The home is ground zero for fellowship, community, discipleship. The home is the place outsiders become insiders. The home is the launching pad for mission and service to the community, both during Jesus' ministry and during the rise of the early church. This is part of our inspiration for why we prioritize meeting in homes at Cornerstone. We're compelled by how Jesus did things. And there's something more personal, more vulnerable, more real about meeting people in a home. It's harder to wear a mask in a home. When someone is in your home, they see more of the real you. When you're in someone else's home, you see more of the real them. There is such a power to hospitality, and I'm proud of our church for living this out. And I couldn't be more hopeful for how God will continue to move in ways that we can't even fully imagine as we all continue to pursue connections in our homes. Okay, we are going to pretty soon transition into a discussion time in our neighborhood churches or online. So I have a couple questions for you to consider and share about as we get into that moment. First off, according to the personality type God gave you, what are you naturally good at and not so good at? And then another one is, when was a time love required you to do something that was in an area of weakness for you and you still obeyed? And how did God use that in a positive way? We'll hope you have a great discussion. Love you all.